Depending on your political persuasion, comedian Dave Hughes has become either an unlikely political hero or public enemy this week after speaking about his personal views on the government's tax changes, specifically the changes to the capital gains tax. Now, this video isn't going to be like a response video or a hit piece on him. I actually don't think he's a bad bloke, or at least I assume he's not. I don't find him very funny, but I mean, neither am I, right? I'm not. I don't even have a gag for that. Actually, I'm just not very funny. But I did hear something really revealing when he spoke. So we'll play the clip and then I'll tell you what I noticed, because I think it might help explain why we're tending to see past each other on this issue. So here's the clip anyway.
My son now buys a $50 or $60 BHP share if it doubles in value. You know, he might earn $5,000 at Woolies for the year, but he has to pay 30% tax on the profits of that share.
Yeah.
That is just discouraging any kid from building wealth.
Yeah.
And I just find that insane that this government would do that. And I just think it really offends me that they just think we all should be working for a wage, and the most we could dream about is having, you know, a unit in Marrickville or something like.
Now, he's talking about his son having to pay a 30% tax rate on income he earns from shares. Now, let me be really clear. I'm not for a moment suggesting that you're a bad person if you trade shares or invest in property. If I had enough money, I'd do the same. But look at me. I'm recording from a goddamn cupboard. I can only afford the webcam because of my Patreon supporters. So thank you very much to my Patreon supporters, by the way. But if I had enough money to invest, then I'd be foolish not to. Property prices have almost doubled over the past decade, and the share market has seen similar rises. And because of the tax incentives that we have in this country, you're actually being financially reckless if you don't park any extra money you have in a property investment or in some share portfolio. And I think Hughes is being actually kind of sincere. He feels that this is one of the few ways that someone from the middle class can genuinely become pretty wealthy. And he sees this as the government really preventing those that have this aspiration of class progression. And we all feel this because almost all of Australians recognise that buying an asset, even if it's just the one that they can live in, could be the defining factor of their economic future. If you can afford an investment property, that might be the difference between retiring comfortably or relying on a pension when we're older. So we all feel that pressure, and we all want to get to that next level where our future feels a bit more secure or even comfortable. It's totally human to want that. But while Hughes talks about his working class roots, I'm not sure he fully appreciates just how much things have changed for the working class in the country since he left it. So let's break those figures down. The median full-time income for an Australian man is $95,700. For a woman, it's $84,800. Why aren't they the same? I thought they were meant to be the same. The median full-time salary for a completely gender-neutral person ends up at about $90,300. Now, that's the median, which means half the adults in Australia on a full-time income earn more than that. But most important for this story, half earn less, and that's across all ages and doesn't include those that can only work part-time because they're a parent or they have a disability or they can't find a job. Or like my partner got made redundant while on maternity leave, which is technically illegal, but in practice happens all the time, apparently. And in case you're wondering, in this case, ended up being a bit of a blessing. It meant she could rediscover her passion for photography, and she now does maternity and newborn shoots. She's amazing, and you should definitely follow her Instagram page. But let's assume Hughes is not on maternity leave, so is statistically less likely to be made redundant, and he earns the median full-time adult salary in Australia. Now, straight off the bat, I ran that salary through CBA's loan calculator, presumed that Hughes had no other debts, no dependents, a very modest weekly expenses, and it said he could borrow $360,000, which immediately means the median priced apartment is well out of reach in every capital city. So let's assume Hughes found someone who finds him funny enough to share a 30-year mortgage with him, and this person is also a median income earner. So Hughes and his missus have a combined income of about $180,000, which after tax is about $141,000, or about $2,700 per week. So noting that the median rent in Australia is $650 per week, let's presume Hughes and his missus are super aspirational and they can save half of their disposable income, $1,000 every single week, which sounds like a lot, but keep in mind in 2021, median house prices in Sydney were going up by more than $1,000 a day. So time is money here. Now, assuming they started saving 3 years ago and they haven't had to dip into their savings for anything, they've avoided avocado on toast at all opportunities, Hughes and his missus should be able to save the roughly 151 grand deposit needed to afford what the ABS tells us is the average first home buyer mortgage in Australia of about 607 grand. The weekly cost of that median mortgage comes in at around $840, which means after they pay this mortgage, they have $1,875 a week left over in their joint bank account, which might sound like enough, even for two people. But let's subtract groceries, assuming this couple don't eat out or do any Uber Eats and can feed themselves for $200 a week. I can't do that, but let's pretend it's possible. Hughesy and his missus are far more aspirational than I am, so they can do it. They're already down to $1,675 in their bank account, and they're still going to need electricity, water, council rates, and they can't survive in the modern era without the internet, especially if you work from home. And of course, you need a mobile phone. And unless Hughesy plans on walking everywhere, he's going to need to spend money on either fuel or public transport. Now, for simplicity's sake, we're going to use the ABS figures of $293 per week household expenditure on transport, which, for the sake of transparency, includes the cost of actually buying a car every few years and paying rego and insurance, etc. So that leaves the Hughes, what's Hughes, eh? What's the plural of Hughes? That leaves Mr. and Mrs. Hughes with about $1,200 a week, which again might sound okay, but it means that after these incredibly conservative expenditures, Hughesy personally has about $87 a day to cover every other cost of life. And that's assuming they have no big medical bills, because remember, they don't have any private healthcare. And on this salary, dentist visits are very painful for a very different reason, I can assure you. Now, hopefully the radiator on their car doesn't start leaking. Hopefully their TV just doesn't stop working, or they don't need to buy a new pair of clothes for work. Now, this is actually a recognized concept in economic theory known as Booth's theory of socioeconomic unfairness, or the poverty premium, which describes how people with less money often end up paying more over time, because when they do buy things like a pair of boots, for example, they can only afford the cheaper option, which has to be replaced or repaired more often because they're often poorer quality. So after all that, Hughesy might, if he's been really lucky in avoiding those big unplanned expenses, he might have $30 or $40 a day to spend on luxuries like Netflix, or maybe a night out once a fortnight. Maybe if they save, they can afford a holiday to Bali once a year. And that is assuming they don't do something really reckless and have a little Hughesy Jr. And oh my God, that's terrifying. So the reality is, if Hughesy was earning the median income in Australia, he's not investing in shares. And the prospect of buying an investment property is a bit of a pipe dream. It's not because he's not aspirational enough. He just doesn't have the breathing space to realistically start looking up. But the real problem we as a nation are facing right now isn't actually the inequality itself. It's the fact that this inequality is growing rapidly. Let me explain why. As I said before, if you have enough money left over at the end of the week to invest, then you are crazy not to immediately put that money into an asset, because every government in the world is currently deep in debt. And to repay their debts, they are effectively, and this is an oversimplification, but they're printing money so that they can repay those debts, which means inflation is continuing to rise. This means the value of money itself is going down. So those with extra money are immediately putting it into assets, while those without extra money are seeing their real-world disposable income going down. This has created a two-class society, an asset-owning class, and those who can afford to just kind of live. And the gap is growing. And then, and this is the part that is genuinely radicalizing people, up until these changes, we gave a tax discount to the asset-owning class. So if your income came from the blue or green line, the government essentially said, well done on cracking into the upper tier, we're going to let you earn half of that tax-free. And yes, I'm sure there are some who use shares to try and save for a house deposit. Personally, I think that's a bit risky, but I'm not a financial advisor. But just think about who the biggest beneficiaries of this tax discount are. It's usually wealthy executives that get paid in stock options, or those that buy properties as speculative investments rather than somewhere to live in. Now, the CGT discount cost taxpayers $21.8 billion a year. 83% of that benefit went to the wealthiest 10%. 54% of the benefit went to the top 1%. This creates a vicious cycle in that owning asset becomes so profitable and the tax incentives are so favorable that once you can crack into that asset owning class, your wealth begins to compound, while those that are frozen out remain just treading water. That's a $20 billion a year handout to the wealthiest people in the country, while Treasury estimates that the interest bill alone on our government debt is going to cost us $28 billion a year by 2028. It's just a bill that we can't afford to pay anymore. So you're not immoral if you can afford to invest money in assets, but it is a privilege. And all these changes mean is that any income you earn from those assets from now on, they're going to be taxed at the same rate as if you earned that money from any other way. And that seems pretty fair. And yes, I get it that Albanese said he wouldn't do it, and he did it. And I understand the sense of betrayal some people feel from that, but I also think the world is changing pretty fast right now. And when you have a situation where half of Australians now feel like aspiration is no longer enough, they're going to start losing trust in our economic system, and they're going to start losing trust in our political system. So for me, this is a national security issue. I'm the furthest thing from a socialist. I don't believe we can ever be a classless society, but Australians need to believe that class progression is actually possible. Because once they lose that faith, class warfare becomes inevitable.